Brethren, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. It is once again a pleasure to see so many of you on here joining us today. As usual, I will start with some general housekeeping rules. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted onto our YouTube channel. Therefore, those of you who do not wish to be seen, please feel free to turn your video off now. To avoid any disruptions during the talk, could you also please ensure that your microphones are kept on mute throughout the talk? Thank you. There will be a Q&A session, and if you'd like to ask a question, please use the hand up icon on Zoom. Wait for your name to be called out. You may then unmute yourself, ask your question, but then please do not forget to put yourself back on to mute afterwards. To give everybody a chance to ask their questions, if you could also please limit yourself to one question, that'd be fabulous. Once again, please do use the hand up icon on Zoom. Thank you. We are giving away, of course, 2 of our bespoke mugs. To win one of these, please answer the following question. What Welsh city does the Grand Master currently reside in? Please type your answers in the chat section, and as always, the first 2 winners will be announced at the end of the show. Brethren, I am now delighted to introduce you to the most eminent and supreme Grand Master, Paul Raymond Clement, Grand Master of both Knights Templar and Knights of Malta orders. Paul started his Masonic journey on the 7th of September 1978, where he was initiated into Corinthian Lodge number 4917 in Swansea, where he was subsequently passed and raised. Paul is a member of all 10 orders that are administered out of Mark Mason's Hall and a fair few others. In the craft, Paul is a past Grand Sword Bearer and was also a Grand Steward from 2011 to 2012. In the Holy Royal Arch chapter, Paul was exalted on the 20th of November 1980 and is a past Grand Sojourner. Paul was advanced as a Mark Master Mason on the 12th of October 1983 into Neath Mark Lodge, number 1125, and is a past Provincial Grand Master for Wales. He is also a member of the Grand Master Royal Arch Council. In the Red Cross of Constantine, Paul is a Knight Commander of Constantine and is a Sovereign Grand Inspector General 33rd degree in the Rose Croix. Indeed, brethren, Paul holds numerous distinguished positions in each of the orders he is a member of. In the Knights Templar, Paul was installed as a Knight on the 20th of February 1984 into the Holy Palestine Preceptory number 502 and was appointed as Grand Master of the Order on the 17th of May 2017. And I'm sure that many Knights will agree when I say that he has gone on to lead the Order from the front, as you would expect from any worthy Knight. Paul is also past Grand Master of the Great Priory of both Greece and Benin, and has travelled the world, sharing his passion for Masonry in various districts abroad. In his personal life, Paul was a director of a catering company until 1990. So if you ever have the pleasure of dining at a festive board with him and see the chef sweating away, the waiting staff standing up tall, and the food served immaculately, you will know why. Paul was also a professional musician from 1975 to 1993 and won the All-Britain Senior Accordion Championship, aged just 14. His talent knows no bounds, and we Masons do not miss a trick. He was swiftly asked to serve as Grand Organist in the Craft, Royal Arch, Mark Master Masons, Knights Templar, Red Cross of Constantine, Royal and Select Masters, Secret Monitor, and the Allied Masonic degrees. Paul is married to Molly and has 2 children, Grace and Lewis. Paul had the pleasure of initiating Lewis into Grafton Lodge number 2347 in 2008 and has since installed him into a number of the 12 chairs he's been through. I think it's safe to say that he's most definitely following in his father's footsteps, a Lewis by name and a Lewis by nature. Most eminent and supreme Grand Master, before I hand the virtual mic over to you, leading on from winning the All-Britain Senior Championship, I have it on good authority that on the 8th of May 1976 in Weston-super-Mare, when you were placed second in the Virtuoso Solo Accordion Championship, your fellow Welshman no less, you were robbed and should have been announced as champion.
Well, thank you, Amit, for divulging my closely guarded, dark secret to half the Masonic world. I trust I shan't lose too many friends, but yes, I did play the accordion in a former life, and a very important part of my life it was too. First, I must thank you, Amit and Mahir, for inviting me on to speak this evening. I do congratulate you both on this venture, which has already proven a great success and is doing so much to broaden our knowledge of Freemasonry. My name is Paul Clement, and I'm privileged to be the Grand Master of the Masonic Order of Knights Templar in England and Wales and our provinces and preceptories overseas. The full title of the order is the Great Priory of the United Religious, Military and Masonic Orders of the Temple and of St. John of St. Jerusalem, Palestine, Rhodes and Malta in England and Wales and its provinces overseas. For the sake of ease and brevity, we refer to this as Great Priory. The name, however, does tell us a few things about the order. It suggests that we are more than one order, and in fact, we are two. The Order of the Temple, or Knights Templar, and the Order of Malta, but united under one Great Priory. It also suggests that we have provinces, and some of those overseas. We have, in fact, 40 provinces, 10 of which are overseas. We also have 27 preceptories, which are unattached, that is to say, not in any province. Some of these meet within England and Wales, and some again are overseas. These preceptories are overseen directly by me and the officers at the Chancery in London. You'll have heard the name preceptory several times, as that is what we now call our units rather than lodges or chapters. Now, I did say the Masonic Order of Knights Templar, and that's important, especially if you are researching for information, particularly on the internet, as there are many Templar organizations which are not in any way connected with Freemasonry and exist for other purposes. I think it's important to say at the outset that we do not have, or claim to have, any direct connection with the medieval orders founded at the time of the Crusades. The history of the original medieval Order of Knights Templar is a fascinating study in its own right, and there are many excellent books to read on the subject. Suffice it to say that we have derived our inspiration from this period of history, which is evident in our ceremonies, particularly the Knights of Malta ceremony, our regalia, and other items of furnishings, banners, and other symbols which make up our preceptories as we know them today. I think it would be an interesting exercise to look briefly over the past 300 years, which, with a few twists and turns, have led us to becoming what we are today. Prior to 1723, the craft required you to be true to God and the Holy Church. Yes, it was Christian, until Anderson's Book of Constitutions in 1723 required Freemasons to be good men and true, or men of honor and honesty, by whatever denominations or persuasions they may be distinguished. This acceptance of other faiths clearly antagonized the Roman Catholic Church, and things deteriorated to such an extent that in 1738, Pope Clement, no relation that I'm aware of, issued a papal bull which called upon Catholic Freemasons and those who were associated with Freemasons to excommunicate or renounce their Freemasonry. This had repercussions across Europe, and the effect in France was that by 1740, Masonic degrees with a Christian theme had sprung up, and we have Templar and Rose Croix degrees being worked in France and Germany, possibly in the hope of appeasing the wrath of the Catholic Church. It was inevitable that these influences would find their way across to England in due course, and it is reasonable to assume that the Templar degree was known of and possibly worked in craft lodges and Royal Arch chapters, particularly in major seaports. We know as early as 1736 that some London lodges were working high degrees. It was in Boston, Massachusetts, however, in August 1769, that the first minute appear relating the installation of a Knight Templar in St. Andrew's Royal Arch Lodge. In England, we have to wait until 1778, when the minutes of the Chapter of Friendship at Portsmouth tell us that they made Knights Templar under the authority of Thomas Dudley, although it is known the camp of Baldwin at Bristol and the Grand Lodge of All England at York were all reconferring this degree. I realize most of you will already be aware of a great deal concerning the name Thomas Dunkley. Again, this is often presented as a paper in its own right. Suffice it to say that he is considered the father of English Freemasonry, a remarkable man with tremendous energy and foresight, who achieved so much and left us a great legacy and a provincial structure which is still in place to this day. Pressure was now being put upon Dunkley to form a grand encampment of Knights Templar for England and Wales. The camp at Baldwin had already tried this and failed, and in January 1791, the Knights of Bristol and surrounding areas persuaded him to take charge of the order by forming a grand encampment, which he did. 7 encampments swore allegiance, and this quickly grew to 28, bearing in mind that the degree was still being worked in lodges and chapters. The first Grand Conclave meeting, as it was styled, took place in June 1791 in London, and Dunkley was installed as our first Grand Master. Thomas Dunkley died in 1795 and was succeeded by Lord Radcliffe, who, although holding office as Provincial Grand Master for the Craft Province of Nottinghamshire, and subsequently First Grand Principal in Supreme Grand Chapter, didn't appear to show much interest in Freemasonry generally, and devoted his time chiefly to his parliamentary career. Lord Radcliffe died in 1800, and there was no appointment made as Grand Master until 1804, when Robert Gill, the Deputy Grand Master, wrote to the encampments on behalf of the Duke of Kent, Queen Victoria's father, informing them that it was the intention of the members of the Cross of Christ encampment to revive the meetings of the Grand Conclave, which had been in abeyance for at least 6 years. Matters had not been helped by the passing of the Unlawful Societies Act in 1799, which caused anxiety amongst all Masonic bodies, until Freemasonry was eventually declared to be exempt. The Cross of Christ encampment afterwards became the Preceptory of St. George No. 6, and meetings of Great Priory are convened under its banner to this very day. At the meeting in January 1805, His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent became our first Royal Grand Master, and we all know what that association has meant to craft and Freemasonry in general throughout the ages. The Duke remained in office for a relatively short period before assuming his position as our Royal Grand Patron, but we are grateful to him for ending a period of stagnation and adding much lustre to the order. In 1807, he handed the order, now in good heart, over to Waller Rodwell Wright, who was a first-class Grand Master, until he moved to Malta, where he became Provincial Grand Master in the Craft in 1812. Whilst in Malta, he established the Melita encampment, which subsequently moved to Hertfordshire, and it wasn't until 2001 that the first of 3 preceptories, which now meets in Malta, was formed, the second being named after Waller Rodwell Wright. Just before he left England, Wright installed as his successor His Royal Highness the Duke of Sussex, brother of the Duke of Kent, and first Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England, which was to be established a year later in 1813. The Duke remained in office for 31 years, 31 disappointing years for Grand Conclave, which was thought to be almost dormant, except for valiant efforts made to keep it alive by Robert Gill, now the Grand Chancellor, and John Burkhardt, the Deputy Grand Master. It is felt that the Duke was placed in an uncomfortable situation with the Act of Union which formed the United Grand Lodge of England, declaring that pure and ancient masonry consisted of 3 degrees, including the Supreme Order of the Holy Royal Arch. Although the original article went on to say it was not intended to prevent any lodge or chapter from holding a meeting in any of the degrees of the orders of chivalry according to the constitutions of the said orders. It is thought that the royal brothers, the Dukes of Kent and Sussex, had insisted on this inclusion. There follows a particularly barren period, which was tinged with disaster when the complete records of the order and other orders were lost in a fire at the home of Robert Gill in 1820. In all fairness to the Duke, he did personally issue warrants and patents to new encampments and provincial grand commanders. Having said that, only one meeting of the Grand Conclave was convened during his period of office, and that was presided over by John Burkhardt, the Deputy Grand Master, to whom the order owes more than we actually give him credit for, as on the death of the Duke of Sussex in 1843, Burkhardt took control, summoned a Grand Conclave, and engineered the nomination of Colonel Charles Chemist Kent, a very senior Freemason, as the next Grand Master, whom Burkhardt eventually installed in 1846. Prior to his installing Chemist Kent, Burkhardt had already ordered that a complete review of the rituals be undertaken, and this resulted very closely in the ritual we still use to this day, with few changes having been made since. Under the new Grand Master, things started to move. Provincial encampments were established, and a complete rewrite of the statutes, which was long overdue, saw the first mention of the degree of Knight of Malta and the Mediterranean Pass. The first comprehensive list of regalia requirements was also included, bearing in mind that the apron was still the main feature, alongside the mantle, sashes, sword, gauntlets, and jewels. William Stewart, the Deputy Grand Master, succeeded on the death of Kent and was installed in 1861. There followed another revision of statutes in which the wearing of the apron was dispensed with. There was also a motion proposed to drop the requirement for a candidate to be a Royal Archmason. Happily, this was rejected. In 1866, the numbers of preceptories, as we see in the Liber Ordinis today, were allocated. Things were progressing, and very nicely too, until a decision was made which produced catastrophic results and very nearly destroyed the order. A group of knights came up with an ambitious idea that the great priories of England and Wales, Ireland and Scotland should unite under one governing body, to be called the Convent General. There followed discussions between the three, and Scotland, who quite quickly did not want to change their ritual as required to conform with that of the new Convent General, withdrew. Draft statutes were written and rushed through Grand Conclave in a manner which was described as improper, with no warning given to the encampments or their members. The result, however, was quite sensational, in that at the first meeting of the Convent General in 1873, none other than His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales was elected and installed as Grand Master of the United Orders of England and Wales and Ireland. The Prince appointed the Earl of Limerick to be Grand Prior for England and Wales, and the Duke of Leinster to be in charge of Ireland, both to be under the control of the Convent General. The new statutes brought certain changes with them. The word Masonic was omitted from the title of the order. Encampments would become preceptories. Commanders, the man in the chair, would become eminent preceptor. There were to be no past ranks, which proved most unpopular, as a knight who was appointed, say, as a great officer, would only wear his regalia for his year of office, and then revert to his ordinary garb. The new ritual was rejected by most of the now preceptories, and many of them even refused to pay the required dues. During the 23 years of its existence, the Convent General met only 9 times, 7 times in London and twice in Dublin. Little was achieved. Hardly anything was ever agreed upon. Preceptories and memberships were being lost at an alarming rate. If the order was to continue, something had to happen. In 1894, a group of knights from England and Ireland were charged with looking into what had gone so terribly wrong. The outcome was that in 1895, the Convent General ceased, and both great priories went back to governing themselves. Thus concluded the first 100 years of their history. The Prince of Wales became sovereign of the United Orders in the United Kingdom, and held the title until he became king in 1901, when he accepted the office of Grand Patron. So a relatively happy ending to an inauspicious period, and out of the ashes came an agreement between England and Wales, Ireland and Scotland, that they would meet regularly to discuss the furtherance of the order and work closely together. This eventually became the Concordat, signed in 1930, which still holds fast today. The next 100 years from 1895 were much more trouble-free, and saw a considerable expansion in both England and Wales and overseas. There followed a succession of notable Grand Masters and Pro-Grand Masters, beginning with the Earl of Euston, who is responsible for regularizing the regalia we wear today, and whose regalia, the metalwork and jewellery at least, I still wear. Unfortunately, I can't show you any, it's all kept in London under lock and key. Under Lord Euston, the rituals of the Temple and Malta ceremonies were printed in the same sort of format as we now have. In 1907, he stood back to become Pro-Grand Master to His Royal Highness the Duke of Connaught, one of the all-time giants of English Freemasonry. It was under his rulership that the practice of having cathedral services was introduced. The Duke had several Pro-Grand Masters, most notably his last one, the Earl of Harwood, son-in-law of King George V, and another huge player in British Freemasonry, as head of the Craft and Royal Arch and Grand Supreme Ruler of the Order of the Secret Monitor. Following his death in 1947, the next successful 26 years were enjoyed under the rule of George St. Vincent, Lord Harris, who was also the Grand Master of the Mark degree, whose passing to higher service in 1984 I well remember, as it was the year I joined the order. Lord Harris retired from office aged 84 in 1973, and Lieutenant Colonel John Lester Warren became Grand Master, sadly only for 2 years until his death in 1975. We then were to enjoy another long and successful period under the leadership of Harold Devereux Still, who I had the pleasure of working with on several occasions when I was great organist. It was during his rule that the word Masonic was eventually restored to our title, having been missing for well over 100 years. Bob Still, as he liked to be known, was an incredibly hard-working Grand Master, and despite his advancing years, travelled extensively. In fact, the last consecration I did with him was in 1995, when at 94 years of age, we all travelled to the Netherlands, there and back on the same day. Bob Still died in the following year, and the Right Honourable the Lord Swansea was in charge for a short period, and still my dear friend Leslie Felgate Dring was installed in 1997. I have to thank Leslie for everything that happened to me, as it was he who appointed me Great Marshal in 2004, a position I filled until 2017, and one which I loved more than anything else, and is now superbly undertaken by Right Eminent Knight Timothy Wheeler. Leslie's health started to deteriorate following a fall which occurred when we were in the Seychelles in 2010, and he retired soon after and sadly passed on in 2012. 2011 saw Leslie install his successor, Timothy John Lewis, at the Clarendon Suites in Birmingham. Tim is a great friend and mentor to many of us to this day, and a brother who has served in many high offices in Freemasonry, including Grand Master of the Allied Masonic Degrees, Grand Secretary at Mark Mason's Hall, and as a member of the Supreme Council 33rd degree. Tim installed me as his successor at Freemasons Hall in May 2017, and I hope and pray that I shall be spared to serve as long as the brother knights wish me to do so. I am supported by an absolutely first-class team of active officers, some of whom are there on a semi-permanent basis and others just for their active year. My deputy, the Great Seneschal, is very high and Right Eminent Knight Andrew Rainbow, who is a very busy and experienced Mason and well known in Nottinghamshire, where he serves as Deputy Provincial Grand Master in the Craft Province. Our Great Prelate, the equivalent of Grand Chaplain, is Right Eminent Knight the Reverend Malcolm Lane, a former Provincial Grand Master and Grand Superintendent of Monmouthshire. The Great Chancellor is His Honour Ian Alexander, Queen's Counsel, a name many lawyers and barristers will be familiar with. The First Great Constable is the Right Honourable the Viscount Gough, and so the list goes on. Our order can indeed boast many distinguished members, both present and past, including His Majesty King George VI, who received the rank of Past Grand Master in 1937. We are administered from Mark Mason's Hall, hence our Great Vice-Chancellor, that is Grand Secretary, is Right Eminent Knight Ryan Williams, and we have the support of his excellent team. Apart from the growth we have seen within our own Great Priory, we have been instrumental in the formation of other Great Priories throughout the world. Since I joined the Great Priory team some 26 years ago, we have officiated at the constitution of the Great Priories of Spain in 1994, France in 2003, Brazil in 2008, and the Netherlands in 2013. Last year, I traveled to South America and constituted a new provincial priory of River Plate, whilst previously I had been in Chennai, India, to bring back into being one of our very senior preceptories, which had surrendered its warrant some 120 years ago. This particular occasion will always stand out in my memory from the support I received from the active Great Priory officers and members of the Grand Master's bodyguard, which has played an integral role in all events of Great Priory for well over 110 years. I'm not going to dwell any more on this, as another brother may wish to talk on the Grand Master's bodyguard on a future occasion. It would be a most interesting topic. Like all Masonic bodies, we have a charitable side. We in Knights Templar are a little different in that we concentrate our efforts on raising monies in support of the St. John of Jerusalem Eye Hospital group. We do have a fund of benevolence which is able to assist when a member of the order requires financial aid. But believe me, our brother knights are passionate in their support of the St. John Ophthalmic Hospital group and have been so for many years. The association was established well over 100 years ago, in the time when the Duke of Connaught was our Grand Master and also the Grand Prior of the Order of St. John. Since then, we have evolved into one of the hospital's principal benefactors, and as such have accepted a responsibility to fund certain aspects of their organization. Our annual contribution pays for a consultant and his or her staff and the running of one of the departments at the Jerusalem Center. From time to time, we've been able to fund other ventures, such as paying for equipment at one of the other hospitals in the group, and recently the badly needed renovation and refurbishing of a children's ward. I have been fortunate enough to be able to visit all but one of the hospitals in the group and witness their work firsthand, and only then could anyone appreciate the extremely difficult conditions they have to work under. To say it's a moving experience would be a gross understatement. And need to say the present situation with the coronavirus has added to their problems, as it has indeed with every organization. Our latest venture is directed at what they call their outreach program, which we have committed to for 3 years. This will enable a team of doctors and nurses to travel in a vehicle fitted with the necessary medical equipment to places where the local people are unable for one reason or another to get to one of the hospitals to receive treatment they so desperately need. Eye disease and sight loss have always been huge problems in that area, and nearly 140,000 patients are treated each year with an outstanding success rate. The swift lapel pin, which I am wearing, is a symbol of our current appeal, which is over and above our regular donations. All you have to do is to donate £20, which, if you happen to be a UK taxpayer, will be £25, and which, in recognition, Great Priory will send you this pin. If you would like to take part in this venture, whether you're a member of the order or not, just go on to the Mark Business Hall website, www.markbusinesshall.org. Go to Orders and scroll down, and you'll find the necessary forms and information to donate £20, which, believe me, will be gratefully received and faithfully applied. Another feature of the order which brings great enjoyment to the brother knights, along with friends and families, is the fact that nearly all our provinces have a very active social calendar. The highlight of this being the annual church service, which will be held at a place of worship within the province, often followed by a buffet or even a formal lunch or high tea. These events are quite spectacular and well worth going along to, either as a member or a supporter. Very often, Great Priory will host a similar occasion, a service of praise at one of our great cathedrals, followed by a family meal at a suitable venue, normally a showground or race course. Since I have been a member, we have had services at Worcester, Gloucester, York, Winchester, Wells, and London on more occasions. All these were truly magnificent, uplifting events, epitomizing the true spirit of the order and giving us all the feeling that we were part of a family of Christian Freemasons intent on celebrating our past, our present, and our future. In conjunction with the province of Somerset, who are marking their 175th anniversary, we will be holding a service at Wells Cathedral on September the 11th, 2021. On this occasion, there will be no formal gathering afterwards, owing to part of Wells showground being able to cater for us. This will give us an opportunity to make our own dining arrangements in smaller groups, or even return to our homes. I do hope this event goes ahead. I know it will be very popular and definitely oversubscribed. Again, all eyes on Mark Mason's Hall website for forms. It would be lovely to see you there. I must again thank Ami for inviting me to give this talk today, and I do trust that some of what I said was of some interest to you and has given you a feel what our order is all about, and hopefully whetted the appetite of those who are not yet members, maybe entice you to come along to one of our open events. Thanks so much for your attention. Now, with some trepidation, I understand that the floor is open for some questions.
Grandmaster, thank you ever so much. An absolutely fascinating insight into the journey of the Knights Templar so far. I'll open the floor up to some questions. I have been sent some from a few brethren. I'll go ahead with those. The first being from Brother John McGregor, sorry. As someone who has some interest in the Knights Templar, where would you suggest I start to make sure it's the right order for me to join?
A very good question, and obviously nobody wants to join an order and find out that they don't like it. To join any order is a commitment, but a little bit more in the Order of Knights Templar because it involves expenditure, the buying of a set of regalia, which too much money, but it's a considerable amount to lay out, and every candidate normally wants to be installed wearing his own regalia. My advice to you would be to seek out Royal Archmasons who are already in the order and who will probably be willing to sponsor you into a local preceptory. Ask them as much as you can and go along possibly to one of the church services or social events, meet the brothers of preceptory, get a feel for it, and make sure you're in the right company. If you're in the right company and the ceremonies are well performed, I can assure you, you will enjoy the order and derive immense satisfaction from your membership. That's my advice to you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ted Jacobson in New York, and his question is, are you now in full amity with England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland?
To the best of my knowledge, we've never been out of amity with Scotland and Ireland. Obviously, England and Wales have been joined from the very beginning. We've worked closely together ever since the Convent General ceased to be, which I did touch upon in my address. And we do, in fact, meet up regularly. We're bound by the Concordat to meet once every 3 years, either at London, Edinburgh, or at Dublin, which we still do. We talk about furtherance of the order, and I have a very strong personal relationship with the other grandmasters. We get on very well indeed, and yes, we are definitely in amity with them. I hope we will forever do.
And how about the Grand Encampment of the United States?
The Grand Encampment of the United States, yes, we definitely in very strong amity with that. It's a very, very senior encampment. I believe it was formed in 1816, so that's right at the top of our list, apart from Ireland, who were first, followed by England and Wales, followed by Scotland. Yes, we always love to see knights from the USA coming to our great Priory because they are so distinctive in their dress. It's really to behold. They wear the tremendous regalia and great plumage on their hats. It's really some all the knights love to see. So yes, we hope that they'll visit us everywhere possible and when things normal.
Fantastic, thank you. Next, we've got a question from Brother Joss and George in India, how did the Knights Templar become the prerequisite for joining certain other orders, such as Thomas of Aquin and Knights Templar priests?
Knights Templar priests, first of all, always had a prerequisite from the KT because of the nature of the ceremony. You have to prove yourself a Knight Templar. I won't go into the ceremony in detail, but it's always been there, and it is a prerequisite because of the ceremony is written. Interestingly enough, back in the 1890s, I believe it was, there was a thought that the Knight Templar priest might come into Great Priory as an appendant order. This never happened, and subsequently, in 1920-ish, they formed their own run college, and now tremendously successful, made in their own right. It's a great thing that they do all this good work. But I'm not a member of. I do know that they only accept Knights Templar, and in fact, they go one step further. They only accept, I believe, subscribing Knights Templar, which is very commendable, difficult, but a wonderful prerequisite to have. Their ceremonies are very, very old, and I don't think they were Masonic, and only sort of in recent years that they formed themselves into a Masonic order, and again are tremendously successful. But the nature of their ceremonies, I believe, would require you to be a Knights Templar before you were admitted.
Thank you. We had a few questions from both Lester Wellington and Brother Russell Splendidly. Same sort of question, really. What is the actual criteria for qualification for joining the Knights Templar?
Well, in our statutes, it does require you to sign a declaration before you're admitted as a candidate. That declaration says that you must be 21 years of age, fair enough. You must be a Master Mason, a Royal Archmason, and those are the Masonic requirements. And the other requirement it does specify that you must be a Christian. It goes on to say that you must be a Trinitarian Christian, and those are the fundamental requirements for joining Knights Templar.
Thank you. And do you have to also be a Mark Master Mason?
No, you don't. There are no other qualifications other than being a craft Master Mason, a Royal Archmason, and of course profess the belief in the Christian Trinitarian faith.
Wonderful, thank you. And finally, we have a question from Brother Giovanni in Italy. I belong to a prior in Malta and was wondering when they would be able to meet again. The next meeting is fixed in for the first week of October, and he was wondering whether you knew that was going to go ahead or not.
Well, as far as Unity Grand Lodge and Mark Mason's Hall, the suspension was lifted on the 17th of July after a 4-month period. So as far as we're concerned, yes, you can meet. Obviously, you have to abide and adhere to the rules and regulations of your local authority. I'm speaking to you from Swansea in South Wales, and it would be illegal for us to meet here at this moment in time because the Welsh Assembly has not given us permission to have public gatherings. In England, yes, I think lodges and chapters and things are meeting at this very moment because they have a different set of rules. So yes, as far as we're concerned, you can meet, and I do. Your meeting goes ahead. So you have to abide by the regulations of your local authority, which obviously is the Maltese government.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much. Most Eminent and Supreme Grand Master Paul, thank you very much for your time. We are honoured to have you on today and give us such a beautiful insight into the journey so far. I'm sure it's whetted a lot of appetites, and a lot of brethren will be looking forward to watching this back on YouTube. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you very much for all the brethren who tuned in. Thank you very much indeed.